Hi, this is David McCann for WebTNG. In this video, we're going to be looking at getting started with Oxygen 6. We'll step through the settings, the configuration. We'll do a tour of the user interface so you know where everything is. We'll also activate Breakdance Elements for Oxygen so you can see what that brings. At the end of the video, we'll have some discussion and look at the pros and cons of Oxygen 6. I'm going to be using the release candidate 1 of Oxygen 6. My understanding is that version 1 will be released shortly, and there shouldn't be any major changes to the user interface or workflow. This is the Oxygen 6 website. Oxygen 6 has good support for dynamic data for ACF and MetaBox. And the ACF Pro repeater fields and MetaBox Pro group fields are supported. Currently, a purchase of Oxygen 6 includes the Breakdance forms for Oxygen 6, the Breakdance WooCommerce integration for Oxygen 6, and the Breakdance Elements for Oxygen 6. This is the one we're going to look at to see what it adds. It says it has over 130 premium elements, but I think maybe that's all three of these added together. If we look at the pricing, the lifetime bundle, $199.50. It includes Oxygen Classic, but I think you're going to be wanting to use Oxygen 6. And as I mentioned, it includes the Breakdance extensions. And then if we look at resources, documentation, this is the documentation for Oxygen 6. I was happy to see this because it shows that there is some good documentation for Oxygen 6 at launch. I have a test site here. You can see it's currently got the 2025 theme, and I have some test demo blog posts. If we go look at the plugins, I have Advanced Custom Fields Pro, which I used to create this team. Custom post type, we're not really going to be looking at that in this video. I have WP Vivid backup plugin installed, which I use for resetting the site between testing cycles. So I go through and do a walkthrough first of what I want to show in the video, then reset the site and record the video. Okay, and then I have Oxygen 6, Release Candidate 1 installed, and I have Breakdance Elements for Oxygen installed, but these haven't been activated yet. I'm going to do that now. Let's activate Oxygen 6. Okay, we now get a menu item. There is not much on the home link, but templates, this is where you would go to create your templates. Similarly, you'd go here to create headers and here to create footers and here to create components. Components are like blocks or sections of your website that you can reuse. And then this is for design library. We don't have any set up now. We'll see in the settings where you would set those up. There's a little bug here where we see these two items twice. Then they have a page for partner discount and the settings. So I need to enter my license key. Okay, so that's active. Then this is a list of performance enhancements. If you're not going to use Gutenberg at all, you can block the loading of the Gutenberg CSS. XML RPC, that's only really used now by a few plugins. I think Jetpack might be one of them. But this is an attack vector, so I always disable it. Emojis, I don't use emojis. Dash icons, this is so the admin icons can be used on the front of the website, so I don't use that. Embed, this is for, in Gutenberg, the embeds like for SoundCloud or YouTube, things like that. I usually leave that on. Really simple discovery feature. That's ancient, and I don't believe that many plugins or companies use that anymore. Windows Live Writer, same, ancient. The REST API, this doesn't disable the REST API, it just removes a link to the REST API from the header of the page. I usually remove that. And this is just a tag that says it's a WordPress site. And then this short link, if you use pretty permalinks where you have the post name and the permalink, this puts a link that has the non-pretty permalink, with the post ID, which isn't needed by anything, so I turn that off. Relational links at the bottom of single posts, WordPress outputs the previous and next posts. And a lot of themes show something at the bottom of the page to navigate to previous or next post, but I don't use that, so it's another one you can turn off. And then RSS here, that's for RSS feeds. I usually leave that on. That's still used pretty widely today. And so if you have posts or pages that you want to share, this is a good feature to leave on. So you can see a number of these, should be deprecated and removed from WordPress, but they don't do that. Okay, then post types. These are the ones that you want to use Oxygen on. This doesn't relate to creating templates for these, just we're actually going to use Oxygen to create the content. I usually recommend to people that you create your content with the block editor, for your post content, and use your page builder for creating the templates and for creating pages. I'm going to save that. Then under advanced, this is a good feature, I think, to allow SVG uploads. SVGs can contain some code, and so there is a security implication. If you're sharing the site with others and you're not sure about them, you can use a plugin like Safe SVG, and that will do a filter. But if you're creating the SVGs yourself, that isn't an issue. Then some plugins filter the content to inject their own, content or whatever to change the content. The content is that area where you have your post content under the title on the edit screen. If you don't have any plugins that are doing that, you can just leave this disabled. And then allow unfiltered HTML and all dynamic data output. Again, there is some potential security issue if you're sharing the site. There are other authors on the site. You wouldn't allow that. And then enable rendering performance debugger. So if you're debugging performance, you can turn that on. Then limit revisions. So I'll save that. Then privacy, I'm glad to see it's off by default. You can turn that on if you want to share some usage statistics with the Oxygen team. And you can hide the partner discount page, this page here, if you want to hide that. Then this is where you would set up design libraries. And I think the original classic Oxygen was perhaps the first builder to do this, where you can turn your website or a website into a host for templates and pre-designed content, and then share that with other sites or with other people, even sell it. So this is where you would set that up. Then this is an area for custom code. Okay, for header or footer. These are tools. You can regenerate CSS cache. So for your templates or pages, your CSS is cached, and if there's some big change to the site, you can come in here and regenerate that if you're not seeing your new changes show up. You can do a soft reset and a total reset to Oxygen. You can create directories. I think this is in the WP content directory. This is a utility here for updating the URL if you've migrated a site. You can export your settings and import them. This is nice. We went through a lot of settings here. If you want to do that, then you can import your default settings so you don't have to go through and set them every time you start a new Oxygen site. Or you can create a blueprint Oxygen site where you set it once, you set up the site the way you want it, and then when you want to create a new site, you just clone that. Elements. This is where you can go through and hide elements that you aren't going to use so that they don't take up as much space in the editor. You don't need to load ones that you're not going to use. And then this is where you would enter your license keys for the Breakdance extensions for Oxygen. I haven't enabled the one we have installed yet, so there's nothing here. And before we enable the Breakdance extension, let's go ahead into the editor and see what we have without the Breakdance extensions, and then what we have with the Breakdance extensions. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to add a page, and I'll save that, and we'll edit it in Oxygen. I like how snappy the Oxygen 6 editor is. Okay, so here is the canvas. You can see it looks pretty minimal. All we see here is this plus to add elements. You can add an element to the page by clicking here or up here. When we click here, we see these are the elements that come with Oxygen 6. These are the native Oxygen 6 elements. There's container, and I add that, and you note over here where it says HTML tag, you can change that to a different type of container. Then you have image, text, and if you add text to the page, likewise you can change the HTML tag. So if you want it to be an H1, for instance, and you come in and do that. This is a structure panel. Here's our container and here's our H1. Let's remove the H1 and let's go to add again, and this time let's search for H1. Instead of clicking on the text element, we'll search and press enter, and note that it added the text element for us, but it pre-selected that H1 tag. So that's a nice usability shortcut. And then rich text. This is the tiny MCE editor, container link, a text link, JavaScript code, a components, a shortcode, or a container shortcode, as if you want your shortcode output in a div or container. Then there's a post loop builder, which is pretty flexible and pretty powerful. There's a repeater field for ACF and MetaBox repeater data. There's a term loop builder for your categories, tags, and custom taxonomies. And WordPress widgets can be added using this element. And then there's a CSS code editor, an HTML5 video element, an HTML code editor, and a PHP code editor, SVG icons, and an OEmbed element. One of the things I just want to point out before we continue is here we have JavaScript code editor, we have a CSS code editor, We have an HTML code editor and a PHP code editor. So those are power user developer tools that are built into Oxygen 6. We have our H1 here, and if we look over here, we see there are no places here to style it, which might be a little bit confusing. But Oxygen 6, these core elements, it's a class-based workflow. So in order to see the layout and styling options, you need to create a class or select a class. Okay, so if we click in here, we can give it a class. I'll call this H1 element. And you hit enter to save it. Okay, and now you note that it is active because it's blue. And now all of a sudden we have the layout and the styling controls. Okay, so that's kind of a tip or a gotcha, depending on how you want to look at it. But you need a class in order to add your layout and style options. Let's go to, say, topography, for instance, and say we want to make this purple. We could do that and add this style option. You notice here there's this plus sign, and when you hover over it, it turns into a dollar sign. That's for variables, which we'll look at in a minute up here. But if we have some variables there, then you can click here to apply the variable. So we'll look at that in a minute. Suppose you want to clear this style. You can click in here and backspace, or you can right click on the panel label and you can copy the typography or clear it. So that's the fast way to clear those. And you see each of these with the arrow here expands into a styling panel for that category. So we have spacing, size, position, topography. Here, let's close a few of these. Okay, topography, background, okay, color, image, and gradient, border radius, and borders, effects, opacity, cursor blend, transition, box shadow, filter, backdrop filter, transform, and a custom CSS editor. These styles just apply to this one element. A big range, probably pretty much all or the vast majority of CSS options are available here for use. The layout options, we didn't look at that. You have display block, flex, grid, none, inline block, inline flex, inline grid, inline contents, and none, visible, and hidden. Then up here you have override variables, conditions. Oxygen 6 has a very powerful set of condition options. You can base your display condition on these variables, okay, including dynamic data, including custom PHP where you would write your own PHP function. So very robust display condition options. You have interactions, animations, and settings or attributes. Notice how the styling and layout options aren't showing, and then when I click and select the class, they show. Now, if we add, say we add an image, I just want to show you here that it'll give you the option. If you come over here right after you've added it, it'll give you an option to use a generated class name, which is based on the element name with a just kind of a sequential number after it. So that's okay, I guess, if you're just kind of doing one-off things. But I would recommend, in most cases, rather than doing that, that you give it a meaningful name, because otherwise you're going to end up with a long list here of class names like image 1, image 2, image 3, and you won't know just by looking at it what it refers to. Anyway, that's this drop down here for creating the classes. So we've looked here at the add element, we've looked at the structure. Let's look at the structure a little bit more. Here you can collapse. You see how this accordion here is open, the container. You can copy all elements and paste elements. You can close the structure panel. If you click on one of the elements in the structure, you can use this here to move it around. You can duplicate it, clone it, or you can trash it. And if you right click, you can copy it, you can wrap it in a container or link, in a div or a link. You can delete it, or you can save it as a component. So that's the structure panel. Then this is a place where you can pick the post or page or custom post type content to use for previewing the data as you're working. And you would use this when you're creating templates, right? So if we're creating a post template, then we would select a post here so we can actually see real data. It's a great feature. Okay, but that's what this is for here. Then these are the built-in breakpoints. So tablet landscape 119 pixels and below, tablet portrait 1023 and below, phone landscape 767 and below, and phone portrait 479 and below. Then if we come over here, we have undo and redo. And then we have here settings. There's the history. So if you need to go back a revision to restore something that you accidentally deleted. There's Element Studio. I'm not going to go into Element Studio here, but that's a very powerful interface and utility for creating elements. And you can take one of these elements and modify it, and then save it and add it to Oxygen for use. So that's nice. You can even save your elements that you create to a plugin, so you can use them on other sites or give them to friends or sell them, whatever. Another nice thing about the Element Studio is that the elements you create with the Oxygen Element Studio, you'll know that they'll be compatible with Oxygen because you used Oxygen to create them. Then these are selectors. You see here's our H1 element class that we created. You can rename, duplicate, delete, lock it so it can't be changed. You can add, your hover states and focus states. You can nest selectors. You can create a new one here. I'm going to delete this. And another kind of selector you can add is you can add element selectors instead of classes. So I'll add H1. Okay, and so this is a way you can add styling for default HTML elements. Color, red, and click add, and you see that it's applied there to our H1 heading. That's a selector area. This is a variables editor and have a collection so you can give it the name you want here. Then you can add variables. So you can add color variables, number variables, units, pixels or rem or whatever, font family variables, and image URL variables. These can be applied then to your elements in the builder. Oh, let's call this, let's say, primary. Okay, and then for the value, we will say salmon. All right, so there's our kind of pink color. Okay, so I'll save that. And now let's go and let's add some text. And we'll give this a class. Okay, and then under topography for the color, we will go here and we'll click our variable. And you see that's applied. Okay, so that's how that works. Here we have a preview, which is still inside of the Oxygen editor, but it hides the UI elements. Here's where you save, and then this is a place where you exit Oxygen. The only thing here we haven't looked at yet is this menu over on the left. Let's open the structure panel and let's look here. This exits to the WordPress dashboard. This is a preferences panel. We'll come back and look at that in just a second. This goes to the Oxygen settings in the WordPress admin. These are links to video tutorials and the documentation. Okay, so let's go to the preferences panel. You have auto scroll to active element, scale content to fit in the screen. I think you'd want that. Disable messages for empty server-side rendered elements. So for example, if you delete something, it will show a little red message or something about that. Show element ID in the structure panel if you want to see that. Disable the code editor line wrapping. Prefer tiny MCE for rich text. Include custom breakpoints in the breakpoint dropdown up here. Disable custom unit dropdown. So on your settings, if you don't want to allow those dropdowns, you can set a default and only allow that. Then there are panel positions. So I suggest you open some panels before setting this so you can see them. So the add panel is set to the left. The element properties, you see now it's on the right, but I prefer that on the left, so I'm going to open that there. And I like the structure panel on the right. And then history and revisions on the right, variables on the right, selectors on the right. And then there's a pop-out option where those show, and this is a reset to default. Then here is where you can upload and set your custom fonts. You can upload your WOFF2 files, or you can set up like Adobe fonts or something. And then this is where you create custom breakpoints. All right, so that's the tour of the editor for default core Oxygen, as it were. Let's go now and enable the Breakdance Elements plugin, and we'll see what that adds. Now when we go to the settings, we have now under extensions a place to enter the license key for that. All right, the key is active. Let's go back to our page and let's see what changed. Obviously, the big thing that changed is that we have another panel of elements, and inside this panel here are a large number of additional elements. These are advanced. You could create some of these things using the default ones as building blocks, but this is kind of the easy mode. The header builder is nice to have, and the WP menu option, these are nice to have if you want a drop-down menu, or you can create mega menus with these. Then you have columns and tabs, and slider and accordion. Okay, again, you could build those things up yourself, but this is the easy mode. Content reveal, you have the menu builder, you have some heading, button, a search form, image box, icon box, some lists, a badge, gallery, social icon, star rating. Okay, see a bunch, a lot of animations, a countdown timer. All right, table of contents, a hover card, Facebook and other social media elements. All right, so, a huge number of elements there beyond the building block basics that you get with Oxygen. There's one other change to the UI. Over here, we now have global settings. That only shows when you have the Breakdance Elements installed. These globals apply generally to the Breakdance Elements. Okay, you can access the variables and selectors here, but these colors are used by default, like if you add a button or something. You have two systems here. Let's add a brand color, and I'll say blue. I recommend that you do some basic colors here for your text and headings and links and things. Here you can add additional colors. Here you can set up your button styles if you want to have those set up and use that button element. Where you see these little edit box icons, that's a sign that there's another edit screen, edit panel here that you can click on to go in. And this is a characteristic of Breakdance so that you don't have too many choices or settings on one screen. I would definitely do some of these colors. If you're going to use the buttons, do those. You can do the typography defaults here, but I definitely recommend doing the sections, containers area, and I'll show you why. Container width, that's going to be your width that you want for your content on your site. I'm going to say 1280, which is a common one. Vertical padding, that's at the top and bottom. So I'm going to say 4 rem. And you notice when I typed rem in, it automatically changed the setting over here. I didn't have to pick it from a drop down. And then horizontal padding, I'm going to say 20 for right and left. And then we'll say 10 for gap here. I'm going to save that. And now let's go to our structure panel and let's just delete everything here. Okay, start fresh. For your content area, start everything with a section and then add a container. Let's give the section a background color. I'll just do this very light purple. And then let's add an image in here. Let's give the container a size of 100%. We'll give the container a background color. Let's do like a light green. All right, and we'll pick an image here to show. And then save this. And now let's go to the front of the site and look at our page. When we add the section and container like that, we get the spacing that we selected for top and bottom and the gutter for the sides. Let's look at this here. This is the container, see, section container, and it's 1280. See, 1280. This is the content area, and we see that it's 1240. But remember, we added 20 pixels to the left and right, so that makes 1280. You can see that there, the 20 pixels. Using the Breakdance section element works nicely for having the padding at the top and bottom and sides of your section be consistent. But there's a gotcha if you don't know about a characteristic of the Breakdance section and you need to adjust the padding. Let me show you that real quick so that you don't get confused or surprised by the situation. So here we are in the editor. We have our section here, and in the globals, just as a reminder, we set the vertical padding, the top and bottom, to 4 rem, and the horizontal padding on the sides to 20 pixels. So let's say, though, instead of 4 rem here at the top, we want it to be just 5 pixels. We've got the, let's close that. Okay, so we've got the section selected. Let's go to spacing, padding, and we set it 5 pixels. What? It didn't change the 2 rem to 5 pixels. It added 5 pixels to the 2 rem. Okay, that's not what we wanted. And the reason that is because there's a hidden container here in the Breakdance Elements that we can't edit directly. And so what you would do if you want sections where you have more control over the spacing, maybe not just your regular content, but for something else, it's easy to handle that. What we would do is we would add a container, and instead of it being a div, we would manually assign it as an HTML section. And then we add another container inside of that, just like we did here. And for the size of that container, we would use a variable. So I've created a variable here called max screen width, which is our 1280. That was what we were setting as our content width, as our container width for our content with the Breakdance element globals. Okay, let's go ahead now in that container. Let's add an image, and we'll choose another picture. All right, so now this isn't centered in the middle of the page, and we don't have that 20 pixel padding to the right and left, but we have gotten rid of the margin and stuff here. Let's go, just like we did on the other one, let's go to background, color. This just so we can see more easily what's what. Okay, that's the section. And then let's go for the container in the middle. Now let's set the margin for the container to be auto and apply opposite. Okay, so that's centered. Let's go now for the padding left and right and make that 20 pixels. All right, so now we have the same thing that we had when using the Breakdance Elements section, but we have control, as you can see, with the padding there. So if we want some padding, what did I say, 10 pixels at the top and bottom, we can do that easily. Okay, so that's not a big deal, but if you don't know about that, you might be trying to adjust the padding and it wouldn't show as you'd expect. Okay, so we've walked through the settings and we've done our tour of the UI, both just Oxygen 6 and when we add the Breakdance Elements. Now for some discussion and conclusions. Let's have a little context or look at the history of Oxygen. The Oxygen Builder was first released in 2016, but people really started taking notice when it got support for dynamic data. And by around 2018, Oxygen was becoming wildly popular. It was lean, it was geared for power users and developers, and unlike many of the other builders of that time, it produced performant output. However, after a few years, people began to notice that the editor was a little laggy and it began to feel outdated. However, classic Oxygen is built on AngularJS, and AngularJS was officially sunset in 2021. Thus, it became clear that the Oxygen team was not going to be able to modernize the editor without a total rewrite. But that's exactly what a lot of people hoped for. Even if it wasn't backward compatible, people were looking for a modern builder that was lean, that was geared towards power users and developers, and that produced performant output. There was a surprise in 2022 when Breakdance was released. Rather than a rewrite of classic Oxygen, Breakdance was designed to be a better Elementor Pro. It's easy to use like Elementor. It has better support for dynamic data. There's no need for a lot of add-ons, and the output, unlike Elementor, was very performant. And the other surprise was that Oxygen users did not get a lifetime license to Breakdance. They got a 1-year license to try out Breakdance. Then there was a second surprise in February of 2025 when the Oxygen 6 beta was released. Out of the blue, what people had hoped for had happened. Here, all of a sudden, we have a rewrite of Oxygen, and it has the features that people were looking for. It's lean, it's built for power users and developers, and it produces performant output. I'm very happy that the Oxygen team released Oxygen 6 and demonstrated their continued support for Oxygen, and Oxygen 6 is included in the lifetime license that classic Oxygen users have. And it also includes the Breakdance Elements. Now let's talk about pros and cons. Oxygen 6 is built on the Breakdance editor. It's snappy and performant, and that speaks to the flexibility and versatility of the Breakdance editor. The UI is lean. There's no fluff or bloat. It doesn't have as many elements in Oxygen 6 as classic Oxygen. However, the basic elements are a toolbox that you can build on, and it has the elements builder included so that you can modify existing elements and build your own, and that's pretty cool. There are some small version 1 bugs and missing features, like there's no light mode for the editor, it's dark mode only. And there is a learning curve. You have to get your head around the class workflow. However, once you do, I found it was much easier to get started with Oxygen 6 than, say, Bricks, for instance. The Breakdance Elements provide an easy mode. Even though we don't have a lot of Oxygen 6 elements, there are a ton of pre-built elements from Breakdance. There's the header builder, the WordPress menu, tabs, accordion, Google Maps, etc. You could theoretically build these yourself, but it's not what most people want to do. So in some ways, you have the best of both worlds. You have the easy mode from Breakdance with the developer and power user focus of Oxygen. So I think that will appeal to a lot of people. Now, I did notice that the Breakdance Elements global settings are separate from the Oxygen 6 selectors and variables. So possibly there could be more integration on that side. Also, there's no way to import a list of variables or a style sheet of selectors. The only import option is to import in JSON format. And it's a little bit gruesome entering your variables by hand. However, the Oxy Made team has a free CSS framework for Oxygen 6. And the core framework has announced that they are going to support Oxygen 6 also. And if you already have the classic Oxygen add-on from the core framework, then the Oxygen 6 version will be free for you also. So that's nice. And I think that roadblock or bump will be eliminated once those CSS frameworks become available. As you've seen when we look at the history of Oxygen, there could be better communication from the team. Breakdance was a surprise. Oxygen 6 was a surprise. They're obviously great developers, and they've actually expanded the team. So there are good videos being created. There's more email communication and some posting in the Facebook group. Perhaps the Oxygen community would be well served by an official discourse type forum. Oxygen 6 has great support for ACF and Metabox. I noticed that ACPT, which is a newer custom field, custom post type plugin, they were able to add their own integration to Oxygen 6 using the Breakdance data provider. It's very similar. So that's a plus, and I'm looking for Jet Engine and maybe Pod support as well. Another pro for Oxygen 6 is the low price. For $200, you get Classic Oxygen, you get Oxygen 6, you get Breakdance Elements for Oxygen, you get Breakdance Forms for Oxygen, and you get Breakdance WooCommerce for Oxygen. And in case you don't know, WooCommerce support is one of the outstanding features of Breakdance. So, as I mentioned earlier in this conclusion, you are getting the best of both worlds, the ease of use of the Breakdance Elements with the developer and power user focus of Oxygen. So for people who already own Oxygen Classic, anytime you want to, you can get started with Oxygen 6. It's included in your lifetime purchase of Classic Oxygen. There is a 60-day money-back guarantee. For new users, you can try that out for 60 days risk-free. 2026 is going to be another year of outstanding releases for WordPress page builders. Oxygen 6 is the first that will be released. There will be others. But I'm confident that Oxygen 6 will be one of the top options available for WordPress site builders. So I hope you have enjoyed and gotten something out of this getting started with Oxygen video. If you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes a big difference. Thank you for watching.